Hello everybody, it is me, GingerPocky, and perler beads is one of the hobbies that I do quite a bit, as you can kind of tell from my color setup over here. And today I just figured I would kind of make a video explaining the tape method, and it's a method for helping to take your beads off of the boards before you iron them because the heat can warp the boards. I'm in a perler bead group on Facebook, and a lot of people seem to have issues with this method. And to me, it's fairly simple, and so I figured I'd make a video maybe helping to explain it in a different way so that more people could understand. Because for me, I think it's a really good way of making sure your boards don't warp. So first of all, there are a couple different ways you could set it up. What I do, so I've made this pattern just the way I want it, but obviously when you tape it and you flip it over, it's going to be backwards, and you would have to iron, and the way I do it is just a flat iron on one side, so I would want to iron it this way, but if I were to just tape it like this and flip it over, it'd be backwards, and then I'd iron it backwards. And so what I do with that is, so if you want to do it this, or you can just, some people iron both sides. Some people just, you can reverse the pattern you're using or the reference you're using and just make it backwards so that when you lift it off, it's already the correct way you want to iron it. I personally just find it easier to follow the pattern the way it already is. And so what I do, and you're going to need an extra board that you didn't use for your pattern. So as you can see, this one is 5. So you're going to need a 6th one, an extra one. And what you're going to want to do first is just carefully separate all your boards that you have the beads on. Careful not to spill anything off, and just kind of make it a little bit easier to flip them all. This one's going to be a little bit difficult with one hand. I gotta put my elbow on that so it doesn't... Okay, there we go. Now I have these all separated. And then what you're going to want to do is take your extra board and make sure that these connecting pegs are facing the same way. And what you're just going to want to do is, and make sure you match, oh shit. Let me fix that and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so all you're going to want to do, make sure the pegs are lined up, and then make sure all of the pegs on the board are in the same spot. So this corner is going to line up with that corner, and then they all just connect that way. Then you just hold it together so that none fall out, and you just literally flip it over. Carefully set it down, and carefully, slowly remove that. And sometimes, with me, I've had projects where I will have already taped them and then decide I don't want to iron them, so my beads are sticky sometimes. Sometimes the beads will stick to the board and lift off with it, but they're usually pretty easy to figure out where they go again. And so I'm going to flip all of these boards and come back to you when I'm done with that. Okay, so now we have flipped all of our boards, and I personally, I would highly recommend flipping all of the boards before you try to piece them back together, because I know sometimes for me it gets a little bit confusing where things go, and then you're trying to slide pegs under boards and having to lift them up a little, and sometimes you can cause beads to spill everywhere and stuff like that. So after you flip them all over, you just put your piece back together the way that it goes. So you just put all the boards the way they go, lift them up, get them on the pegs. And for some reason that's not clicking. So I think I'm just going to pause and come back once I've put it back together again. Okay, so now we have the piece back together, and as you can see now, it is backwards. I'm not sure how I managed to get this one out of sync with the rest, but it should be okay, because the next step, we're not going to really do so much more moving as we're going to be taping it down. Now, one of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to do the tape method and then they end up being not successful is because they're using the wrong kind of tape. You cannot use duct tape. You cannot use Scotch tape. The only tape I've ever used, and it works very well, is just masking tape. It works it's like the number one I'd recommend. I've heard painter's tape works as well, but I've never personally tried it, so I can't really tell you how well that would work. Masking tape is the way to go in my experience. And all you're going to want to do, let me see if I can try to get this set up so kind of you can, oh no, that bends it down way too much. Maybe if I set it up here, I can show you more. Okay. Hopefully is kind of a better view. So all you gotta want to do, get a piece of masking tape. I usually start at the bottom. You can kind of measure, but just be careful not to drop the tape onto the beads because then it lifts them all up. Rip a piece of tape off and just carefully set it. Put the ends onto the board, and then you can kind of make sure it adheres a little bit more to the piece. You can do pieces halfway, like that. If you don't rip up a piece that's long enough, that's okay too. You just got to be kind of careful to really have it pushed down on it while you push the tape on so that it doesn't lift up beads and ruin your entire thing. So I hope you were able to see that from the angle I had it at. I'm going to tape up this whole thing. Another thing is make sure the tape is overlapping a little bit, because if you have all these individual pieces, when you go to lift it, they're not stuck together and then it just falls apart. That's another mistake I've seen people make. So I'm going to tape this whole thing and then come back with the next step. Okay, so now we have the entire piece covered in tape. Another thing I should have mentioned earlier is you want to make sure you have a little bit of extra tape on each thing, connecting to the actual board or to your table or desk. Because if you just have it barely covering the bead, it doesn't stick as well. And now here comes the next common mistake that happens to people where they say they don't like the tape method and it doesn't work and it's stupid and how does anybody use this? They place the tape and then immediately try to lift it and flip it. And that is a big mistake, because if you don't make sure the tape is sticking well enough to the beads, when you try to lift it and flip it over, all the beads will simply fall off. So you want to push down on it, and people use different tools. So people use like a pen or a rolling pin, and in my experience the easiest thing to use is just a spoon, and it works the best. So you got to be careful though, sometimes if you have your finger like this it can get hot because of all the friction, but you really just want to this is hard to do with one hand, but rub it like this and make sure that it sticks to all the beads. And you just really want to pay more attention to the edges, because sometimes even if you do use the spoon, beads will fall off. It won't be as many as if you don't do this. It'll be usually like 1, 2, or 3. And they're a lot easier to just stick back on if it's in the middle somewhere, where you can just fit it into a space rather than the edges. So you just want to make sure you rub the edges really good, the middle as well, but pay more attention to the edges than you do the middle. And so I'm going to come back after I have this all adhered, and then we'll be ready to flip it over and go to the next step. Okay, so now that I have run my spoon all across my beads, you can't really tell much of a visual difference, but the beads are much more better stuck on there. And so the next thing is to lift it and flip it. The way I usually do this is just pick a side, and I usually pick the left side because I'm right-handed, so I'll be flipping it this way, and just lift up all the excess tape that you have off of the board. Be kind of difficult with one freaking hand, but yeah. So you're just going to want to start at one side. As you can see, I'm already lifting up the beads a little bit and they're sticking. One fell out, but that's okay because it's probably in the middle since the outline's black. And just carefully lift it, and comes off by itself for the most part. And there you go, we flipped it and only one bead came out. And if we can try to find where the hell it came from. Hi everyone, sorry, I think I hit the stop recording button on the last one. And this video might end up being 2 parts because currently my phone is being stupid and won't let me transfer files onto my computer. So I might not be able to edit this into one video. So this may be part 2 unless my phone has a miracle. I also have it plugged into the wall now, so I'm doing it at a different angle. And it's a little bit difficult, but there's not much else to show you anyway. And so this is the bead that fell out. As you can see, it came out of a middle space. And I'm just going to show you, like, it's so much easier just to pop it back in there and push it down than it would be to one of the edges where you're trying to line it up perfectly like the board. If that does happen though, you can use the board a little bit. It's a little bit more difficult, or you can just lay the piece back onto the board and try to get the bead on it. So the next step that I usually do in preparation for the next step is cut off some of the excess tape on the sides. Try not to cut like super close to the bead, because then when we're doing the final step for the tape method, it can cause some problems. If you do cut too close to the bead though, you can cut off a small piece of tape and just like stick it on the back of it so that the bead still has some tape on it. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off some of this edge, and then I'm going to show you the final step for the tape method. And the number one most common mistake people make when doing the tape method, and it being the reason they don't like it and never use it again, is because they forget to do this very crucial, very important final step. So I'm going to come back to that in just a second. I seriously just did it again, and I think it's because I lock my phone that it ends the pause function on the video. So this might be freaking part 3 if I can't get it to edit into one video. But so as you can see, I cut off a bunch of the excess tape and you end up with this little ball of tape. One thing I'm going to say, if you're going to be doing this, have a pair of scissors exclusively for this function, because they do get very sticky. You can kind of see some of the tape residue on there. Kind of, the camera would focus. But moving on to the final step of the tape method, the most important thing that you have to do if you don't want your project to get ruined, and that is poke holes. So when you iron with tape on it, it gets really hot, and if you don't poke holes in the back of the tape for the heat to escape through, it will explode the bead. And instead of a nice round look or a flat square look, depending on your ironing preference, it'll be a circle bigger than one of these because it explodes. It does not look pretty, and it can ruin a project. Now, what I used to do is just take a board, and you would just poke holes that way and line it up with, you can kind of see through the tape a little bit, and just poke holes like that. You can kind of see how that would work a little bit. The reason I don't do it this way anymore is because, well, at my old house, I had this really nice, sturdy wooden desk that I would do perler beads on. It was a lot smaller, but it was a lot sturdier, and so I was able to push the board, even like if I had to do almost the entire board like this, I would be able to push it down like that. But I moved, and I gave that desk to my sister, and so I bought this kind of a flimsy wooden table. I mean, not wooden table, flimsy plastic table. And so when I try to do bigger spaces like that, I can do the corner because I have more leverage or whatever it is, but I can't do big things like that because it just doesn't, the table bends and won't let me push down like that. So what I've resorted back to is my old method of a freaking tack, push pin or whatever. And you just literally, you have to poke a hole through every single bead, and it is kind of tedious. But for me, it is worth it to, 1, not ruin my projects, and 2, to not warp my boards, because I don't have the money to be buying new boards every single time. As you can see, I have like 18 or 20 or something, and I really need them for some of the bigger projects I've done, and I can't be buying new ones every single time I buy beads. So that's all you gotta do. This one, I'm not gonna sit here and poke all the holes for you. So there is a piece over here that I did yesterday that already has all the holes poked through it. Sorry, my bed has groceries on it that I haven't put away yet. But this is a Richard mask from the games Hotline Miami and Hotline Miami 2. And as you can kind of see, I already poked a hole through every single bead using that tack yesterday. And so this is what it should look like. I don't know how well you can see it. But you see how like easily you can just hold on to this and the beads don't fall off if you adhere it correctly. So that's what I've seen a lot of people do, is not poke holes, and then when their project explodes, they get angry and they say, why does anybody use the tape method? Tape method doesn't work. That's it though. So, and then do not iron on the side you have the tape on. Another thing I'm going to say real quick is iron. You can either use ironing paper from Perler or whatever other bead brand. I don't know if they have ironing paper, but this is what I use, Reynolds parchment paper, and you can just get a huge roll and rip some off to the size you need. Because when I find when I reuse Perler ironing paper, it makes ripples in the iron, like the beads when you iron them, and it just doesn't look as good if you reuse the same paper over and over. I think you can buy a huge roll like that of the Perler ironing paper as well, but I just prefer Reynolds because it's cheaper and it works just fine in my experience, and I think it actually looks better than the Perler ironing paper, but whatever. And so, yeah, you just put ironing paper and you iron it, take the tape off once it'll stick. I do flat irons, so I just completely iron one side and I leave the back side alone. And so for me, it is safe to just rip the tape off once it's done. Some people prefer to do soft iron on both sides so it has more of a beady look. And if you're going to do that, you're going to want to take the tape off the back a little bit more slowly and carefully, because if the beads aren't super melted together, it can break. So just be careful with that. And that's basically the tape method. Now you know a lot of common mistakes people make. And hopefully, if you've tried it before and it didn't work for you, hopefully you can avoid some of those mistakes, and hopefully it'll be a better ironing process for you, because for me it works wonderful. So that's going to be the end of my video. Hopefully it's not uploaded in 3 separate parts, but I'll see what I can do. Bye.